we took out a second mortgage on our house and we invested dollars in putting our son into this program. After 4 years, so from 8 until 12, he was at that school, and all they do is cognitive rewiring. And
Mhm.
he went back to the same psychologist and she did the same testing. And she said to me, I have never seen this before. He no longer has a learning disability. So
Wow.
my son now reads voraciously. He's a writer and he reads all day long. He reads silently, he reads visually, and he has a photographic memory for everything he reads.
Welcome back to another episode of Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. I'm your host with both professional and living experience with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and I am so excited to bring you today this very, very special guest, Dr. Jennifer Fraser, who is going to be talking with us today about medical gaslighting and how our brain works. And, are we being just misdiagnosed or are we being gaslit? And I know it feels like gaslighting, doesn't it? I'm sure everyone listening and watching today has experienced that. Dr. Fraser, thank you so very much for being so willing to come on, even though you didn't know me from Adam when I reached out to you. I'm so pleased and so excited about bringing this conversation to my audience.
Thank you so much for having me, Patty. I'm really excited to share the knowledge I have and the journey I've been on, because it has been a medical journey and I've learned a lot. And I think the more we share our experiences and our stories and what we went through and help others better navigate it is all very valuable.
Yes, yes. So people with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, we are very prone to bullying and to being influenced by others, and especially those in authority. And that's tied to a lot of the quirks in our wiring, such as we tend to be people pleasers, but we also tend to be very gullible and just easily influenced. So with varying insights into our own vulnerability in that. So a lot of us have the experience of people in our families saying, I can't believe you fell for that. I can't believe you didn't see this. And I experienced that in my own life, being taken advantage of and used by somebody so to a devastating extent, even though I had a master's in psychology, and it's just like, what? And which triggers so much shame, right? But how can we know what type of advocacy that we need when we interact with either medical personnel or other systems of care?
Yeah, in my research that I did for the Gaslit brain, where I was really looking at these issues around gullibility, for example, I found that everybody, no matter how educated, how experienced, how advanced in your career, how worldly, how street smart, we are all susceptible to
Mhm,
gaslighters. And they can come in many different forms.
mhm.
And my sense, because I have spent probably more time with doctors with my second son than, he sees doctors more than friends. And
Oh,
so I therefore see doctors more than friends. And I
yeah.
I have maybe out of all the hundreds of specialists and practitioners and nurse practitioners and physio and everyone that I've dealt with, the percentage of individuals in the medical system that are truly gaslighting is extremely rare.
Yeah.
Now, where the gaslighting happens and we believe things that are inaccurate and untrue, my experience has been, and in the research I see this as well, it's far more likely human error and
Mhm.
misdiagnosis.
Yeah.
And doctors are under so much pressure to be godlike figures who you can trust and who
Yes.
don't make mistakes, that
Yeah.
we lean on them to tell us because we don't have the expertise. And
Yeah.
it's usually very, very serious, very high stakes.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
it's health and it's life and death. And so
Yeah.
the medical system is set up for this really strong sense, I think, in patients who've been misdiagnosed and disappointed and led astray to feel that it's a kind of a real manipulation when in fact it is human error
Yeah.
and shame. The
Yeah.
doctor has as much
Yeah.
shame and fear as the
Yeah.
patient does.
Yeah. I think that plays into why systems of care are so slow to adapt to the neuroscience that's been coming out, because there's that level of responsibility. The administrators have to look themselves in the mirror and realize how the outcomes would be so different for thousands of people they're in charge of had they only known something. And that's a very painful expectation for us to hold them account to.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
completely agree. I think that we have to change our thinking about that, though, because science is always changing. When
yeah,
you read
yeah,
neuroscientific research, they will never
yeah.
say outright, this is how it is. They always say, all of our research suggests that.
Yes.
And that's
Yeah,
because science is that's what
yeah,
science is. It's always trying to
yeah.
get a better, more accurate,
Right,
more helpful answer.
right, right, right. And I think too, we have to, like going back to the medical field, we have to remember whether it's doctor training or nurse practitioner training or even just nursing school, that they have very little time, even if it's 8 years, that's very little time to learn all that there is to know about, a multitude of disease processes. And so they might only get 30 minutes on diabetes. They might only get 10 minutes on FASD. So it's hard to keep up with. And the demand for continuing education on a countless number of things.
Yeah, it really is a position of extreme pressure and stress. As we're watching our doctors suffer a lot right now post COVID, I think we're all becoming more aware of just how challenging that system
Yeah,
is. It's one of the things that I've studied is how much empathy makes a difference and how
yeah,
much empathy in the medical profession can make a huge difference. So if
yeah,
doctors can be trained to really heighten and activate when they are with an individual, when they're with a patient, to really try and listen empathically. So listen what the patient is telling you, what the experience is that they have, regardless of your training even, or the limits or biases or lack of research that is scripting how you respond.
yeah,
Those are going to be doctors that are less likely to make a mistake
yeah,
or misdiagnose. And that's why all of us as patients, the more we can work with our doctors and bring in,
yeah,
this is the latest research, this is what I'm seeing. I know you have limited time. I would appreciate more than anything if
yeah,
you could look into this. That type of approach is going to get us
yeah.
all on a better path.
Yeah. One thing I've experienced with my diabetes, because I've only known about the FASD for, it's been less than 10 years, but it's been 6 decades with the diabetes. And I learned very early on to approach medicine with a consumer mindset. I hire them to give me guidance, but I maintain full responsibility for my health because they're only with me 40 minutes a year, and it's up to me to keep me healthy. And a lot of people in the medical community are very threatened by that mindset, that attitude. But it sounds to me, what I'm hearing is that it's helpful to soften that and to bring them into a space where they can be empathetic and get their focus on me as a person as opposed to their next patient and the one after that and the one after that, because they live in 15, 20-minute increments. And
I
and
I think that's very wise. And I also think it speaks powerfully to what we see now in the neuroscience that can really change the trajectory and expectations and hopes and dreams of people that have FASD in particular. Because I say that because, when I was growing up, I lived through, and you would have lived through too, Patty, I lived through the fitness revolution and the aerobics revolution. And what was really
yes.
interesting about that was prior to Jane Fonda dancing around and dancing to bad 80s music and wearing a ridiculous outfit, we all thought that fitness and exercise was the domain of athletes. And if you were good
Mhm.
at sports and so
Yeah.
on, then you would be fit. And the rest of
Yeah.
us, we didn't take responsibility for that. We didn't become active. We
Right.
didn't pursue
Right.
really great heart aerobic, etc.
Yeah.
And so what happened in that moment was in the 90s, Jane Fonda and that whole group of people made us realize that you don't have to be an athlete to be fit.
Mhm.
You don't have to be an athlete to
Mhm.
take care of your health and really improve all of your outcomes for
Yeah.
longevity and midlife chronic disease and blah, blah. And
Yeah.
so it was very empowering. And we are at a tipping point of another scientific revolution that is showing us that our brain health, no matter what kinds of
Mhm.
traumas we're dealing with, from FASD to ADHD to epilepsy and having to have
Mhm.
surgery to brain tumors to trauma, which scrambles the brain, all of those things can be improved by what we ourselves practice. Now, it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we don't see mental health practitioners or don't go to a psychologist, don't go to a psychiatrist. Same thing with the doctor. Just because you're taking
Yeah.
responsibility day in, day out for your diabetes doesn't mean you don't consult the experts. But
Right.
we can do wonders with our own brain health
Mhm.
and strength
Mhm.
by daily fitness.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're kind of jumping ahead of how I envisioned the conversation going. But to the audience, I had the good fortune of sitting under a webinar that Jennifer did just a few days ago. That if you're on the LinkedIn platform, you may have seen the advertisements for ADHD and medical gaslighting. Wonderful, wonderful conference. But one of the things she talked about in that conference was an app you can download onto your phone called BrainHQ. And so I downloaded that this morning before we sat down to record this session and started, playing around on it. And it was very easy. And you can't start playing on it until you tell it what you want it to focus on. So it's very tailored to what you see as your priorities for your own brain health, which is fantastic.
Yeah, the Brain HQ app is developed by a team of international neuroscientists, and it's the only brain app out there that has over 100 studies and passes the independent research with flying colors. So there's nothing
Okay.
else like it. I have people saying to me, why do you privilege Brain HQ? Why don't you talk about other brain training? And the reason is because they do not have the scientific backing to make it worth your
Okay.
time. So there actually was a lawsuit with Luminosity. I think it's called Luminosity. And they were trying to say, oh yeah, we change your brain and we make it healthier and
Yeah,
it's
I
good for
remember
you.
those.
And they
Yeah.
got sued because they can't prove it. Brain HQ can prove it. And it just recently
Okay.
has been all over the news because of two key components. One is they are now able to see that Brain HQ training, and it's like half an hour a day, gamified, cheap, online, but it is designed by neuroscientists. It's hard work. In the areas
Uh-huh.
where your brain struggles, it's really hard work. And it can be very repetitive. It's not a ton of fun. It's like going to the weight room. You go to the weight room and you do your reps. You're doing the same thing over and over again. It's not new and exciting and fun like a video game. It's really hard work. The reason being, though, is you do it because it can prevent things like dementia and that it is showing
Yeah.
unbelievable ability to prevent Alzheimer's and dementia. And
Yeah.
what's so important for FASD is that you could start a child on Brain HQ at about 12. So right when you're starting to see some of the mental, cognitive, social frustrations with adolescent
Uh-huh.
brain development, that is a perfect time to start kids
Yeah.
on Brain HQ because what it does is improves on a very fundamental level all of your cognitive strengths.
Yeah.
And so it is a game changing app. I have
Yeah.
800 more
Yeah.
things to say about it.
Well, one thing that I want to say in response to what you just mentioned about it not being fun compared to, you know, the variety of other apps that I play too much, there's a confession, is that it's laying the groundwork, right? Our part of the problem with FASD is that a lot of the links, the neural pathways are damaged or missing. And to build to improve the strength of pathways or to build new pathways where they're needed requires that repetition. And so but that lays down more myelination on the nerve cells and enables the cognitive functioning to develop or to speed up or to improve. And so, yeah, that is very important.
So the reason that I have moved into the space of reading all of this neuroscientific research in my work is because when my son was 8 years old, so this is my second child, when he was 8 years old, we got that ominous telephone call from the school. Could you and your husband please come in? And we were like, okay. So our son, I spent a lot of time reading to my kids when they were little, and Angus in particular was just on fire for Greek mythology. Well, he still can tell you anything about Greek mythology that you might want to know. He does not
Yeah.
forget it. But when he was at school, of course, he's reading silently as they do in school. And they were saying, he reads perfectly. He could read out loud perfectly. But when he goes to write the test, he is making up the answers. It's like he hasn't read the book. And I thought to myself, well, that's a strange, I taught for years. So I was like, that is different. So we took
Yeah.
him to a psych ed, a professional psychological education specialist who assesses brain, basically. And she came back and said, I really have bad news. Angus has less than 1% ability to visually retain anything. And so we were pretty shocked. I went to the learning resources people that I worked with and said, okay, just don't pull any punches. What does this mean exactly? And they were like, whoa, this is really, really bad. This is terrible. I don't know what to say. Like, visual retention is kind of everything. So I started to shop around and figure out what we were going to do. And I found a program called the Eaton Arrowsmith program. And the Eaton Arrowsmith program does cognitive rewiring. So I'd never heard of BrainHQ by this point. Cognitive rewiring. I was like, okay. So we took out a second mortgage on our house and we invested, $120,000 in putting our son into this program. And after 4 years, so from 8 until 12, he was at that school, and all they do is cognitive rewiring. And he went back to the same psychologist, and she did the same testing. And she said to me, I have never seen this before. He no longer has a learning disability. So my son now reads voraciously. He's a writer and he reads all day long. He reads silently, he reads visually, and he has a photographic memory for everything he reads. So I tell this story for your audience because anyone who's a parent, anyone who's an adult suffering from FASD, the neuroscience is clear that our brains are wired to repair and recover. It does not matter what's happened to them. They can rebuild in the most stunning ways. And with this BrainHQ, it shows that it takes about 30 hours. So usually you do half an hour a day, 30 hours. So we're looking at 60 days, but you can do it 4 or 5 times a week. You will see like shocking improvement. It is so good for repairing, recovering, myelinating brains.
Yeah. That is amazing. And, that brings to mind something that flitted through my mind earlier in our conversation when you talked about preventing dementia. That's important for my audience because according to the first survey that was conducted by the ALC, Adult Leadership Collaboration of the FASD Changemakers, those of us with FASD have a 209 times increased likelihood of early onset dementia. So if we can do this or anything else that you're advocating for to minimize that and keep us from becoming that statistic, that would be well worthwhile.
Well, I have a fabulous story for you then, because BrainHQ has just been all over the international news, 200 outlets across the globe, because over the last couple of months, they've been able to prove that BrainHQ, doing this training, boosts your acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that keeps your brain cells young. It keeps them
Okay.
fit. So we, as a society, we all understand that we can keep our bodies fit. We can work out, we can exercise until our last day on the planet, and it's going to improve all of our physical outcomes as we age.
Mhm.
Well, what most people don't know is we can do exactly the same thing with our brain. We can go to the brain gym every day and we can improve the fitness of our brain all the way until our last day on the planet.
Mhm.
We have
Mhm.
neuroplasticity until our last day, and that is our
Yeah.
brain's ability to get stronger,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
change. So, what's really fascinating as well is just recently, like in the last couple of weeks, research came out that shows that people who did BrainHQ 20 years ago, so 20 years ago, they did 30
Uh-huh.
hours of BrainHQ. They stopped. Okay. So for 20 years, they haven't done it. 20 years ago, they did their 30 hours. They are seeing with these people that did not keep up their brain fitness regime, just did the 30 hours 20 years ago, they have a 25% less chance of dementia Alzheimer's.
Wow. Okay.
So imagine if they had kept
Yeah.
doing it, we might have
Yeah.
seen even higher numbers of people.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what's exciting in this world of people who have something, and I do not mean to minimize, not even for 1 second do I mean to minimize FASD and the absolute challenge
Mm.
and suffering it poses. That said, how I feel about my 8-year-old is it opened the door to all of us in my world to understand how much brain training can change our outcomes and the health of our brains. And I work on abuse culture. So people who've been abused in all kinds of normalized ways in our society, you don't have to touch the body to do significant physical
Yes.
damage to the brain.
Yeah.
Physical damage. It's visible on brain scans. Again, most people don't know this. But when you do know this, you all of a sudden understand that certain people you're dealing with who might be bullying you or insensitive or unkind or cruel, or even worse,
Mhm.
Patty, gaslighting you, those
Mhm.
individuals very likely have a brain injury. They don't even know it. And they think that they're, being powerful or they're manifesting status by hurting other people. Well, I can tell you, if we were looking at a brain scan of them, we'd be like, wow, whatever happened to you is not good.
Well, and that shouldn't be surprising because we've known for a long time, generally, the class bullies have been bullied at home. And it's just the way they are managing their stress response to being victimized.
Exactly.
So, because we all need to have some degree of power and control in our lives, some sense of autonomy. And so that's often what we see in the bully culture is that victims become bullies. And it's just trying to have some autonomy when they're so helpless at home.
And where my work comes in is I want them to know that they and schools to know and sport
Yeah.
programs and workplaces, you don't discipline someone who's manifesting that kind of mental trauma. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be held accountable. They should absolutely be stopped. But the way I stop them is to say something like, wow, if you came into the workplace or into school with an infectious disease like a virus, we would immediately get you medical care. We would quarantine you. We would do, tracing to find out who you might have infected. This would be a medical response that we would have because you
Yes.
clearly need medical attention. But instead,
Yeah.
what do? We look at it through the ethical lens. We go, you're a bad kid. You are going to get suspended. You're going to go back to the
Yeah.
home that's causing you to have these mental aberrations, and we're going
Yeah.
to just abandon you there.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
And yeah, and that happens so often in the FASD population. And I imagine with several other neurodivergence populations, because when we are, um, victimized, whether it's microaggressions by nobody in the world understands us, or being blamed, shamed, and punished for things beyond our control, because it's all about the neurology and the way that we're wired, we cannot help our responses, and after when we're continually blamed, shamed, and punished, we defend ourselves at the drop of a hat. And eventually those defenses change from just withdrawing to lashing out. And then we see that school to prison pipeline, right? And
Just makes me crazy. Just even
yeah,
even though this is what I work on, hearing you articulate that makes
yeah,
my blood just like
yeah,
infuse. So one
yeah,
of the projects that we're working on that we've been working on for years, it's so difficult to get off the ground, even though we have fabulous people, including a judge on side. This is in Pennsylvania. we are moving slowly but surely towards having a program for kids that get put into the prison system. So
Yeah.
instead of just school to prison pipeline, it's like, yeah, no, we're going to turn that
Yeah.
around. We are going to take your kids that you want to put in jail for 6 months, and we are going to put them in a brain training program. And in our brain training program, we're going to teach them why they made a terrible decision, why they are in
Yes.
fight mode, why they're acting with such stressed out desperation 24/7, what trauma
Mhm.
has done to their brain, how they can fix that
Yes.
trauma, no problem. The brain can be
Yeah.
rehabilitated, it can return to
Yeah.
organic brain health, and
Yeah.
then it can be built stronger. Like, why would
Yeah.
we not do that
Yeah.
with kids that are coming from such a difficult background
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
they are neurologically programmed to behave in
Yeah.
destructive ways?
Yeah. And this is totally off the subject, but I am at heart a Pennsylvanian. Where in Pennsylvania?
In Luzerne County.
Lucerne. That's Eastern, right by Philly?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a Pittsburgher.
Well, there you go. There you go. I've just been asked to present in Pittsburgh at a conference, and I can hardly
Awesome.
wait to go. I'm going to present to judges. And, if we can get the criminal
Yeah.
justice system working
Yeah.
really closely with the education
Yes.
system and the neuroscientists, we could
Yes.
change everything. And, what
Yeah.
makes me really I just find it stunning that we invest so much taxpayer money
Yeah.
in trying to downstream repair all this damage
Yeah.
that's done to kids.
Yeah.
And we punish the kids for all the damage that's done to them. When in actual fact,
Yeah.
if we treated this like a public health issue and we
Mhm.
really got them the rehabilitation that they need, or we prevented the harm being
Yeah.
done to them in the first place, we had a much
Yeah.
bigger understanding of
Yeah.
things like FASD or
Yeah.
ADHD or trauma, all these things that
Yeah.
make us behave in ways that we don't want to.
Yeah.
Uh, it would be a massive cost saving for the taxpayer.
Yes. Yes. So Jennifer, listen to these stats for a minute. So we know that the CDC says 1 in 7 women report drinking during pregnancy. We know that worldwide 1 in 4 women drink, and the unplanned pregnancy rate down here is like 45%. I think it's closer to 50 up in Canada. CanFast, which is what everyone in my audience should know CanFast. CanFast published this just a few months ago that the current prevalence rate for FASD is 8% in North America. So that's both Canada and US put together, but that's huge. That's 1 in 12 kids if we're dealing with the school system. So include that when you're talking with these judges and these educators. 1 in 12 students will have brain changes from the prenatal alcohol exposure. Regardless of if they're ever diagnosed, they have been affected. To varying degrees, because everything depends on the timing of exposure, the intensity of the dose. Like, was it for like Jewish population, a thimbleful of wine on Friday night? Or was it a 6-pack? Or was it a fifth of vodka? The intensity too. But, because the liver is formed in the first month, but doesn't produce the enzymes to break down the alcohol until late in the 8th month, that alcohol continues to do its damage in the baby for 5 months or so. That's what they find in testing the umbilical cord. It's there for 5 months. Long after mom sobers up, that baby is still being impacted, and their brains and other body systems are all being impacted for a much longer period of times. There are a lot of kids in every classroom who are impacted.
And this is why in every single classroom, as soon as kids turn 12, they should all be taught about adolescent brain development, which is when we see mental health issues really rise up. Same thing with
Mhm.
behavioral, same thing with things
Mhm.
like, the prevalence that we see now of anxiety and depression. And they should all be taught about this is what's happening in your brain. You can't help it. It's like
Yeah.
hormones. It's going to
Yeah.
happen to you. But here's how
Yeah.
you can work with your adolescent
Yeah.
brain because it won't be your prefrontal cortex won't be mature until 25.
Yeah.
And the prefrontal
Yeah.
cortex is the part that really helps us figure out what's a good decision and what's not, what
Yeah.
consequences are going to be, etc. So,
Yeah.
if we had kids, all kids doing Brain HQ, we would be building stronger, healthier brains, helping them
Mhm.
navigate the adolescent brain phase. And so I'm working with Dr. Michael Merznick and others on a really exciting breakthrough has
Yeah.
happened in Illinois. So in Illinois, this is a global first from as far as I know. Illinois has decided, and it's been signed into law by the governor, every single child in the school system from grade 4 to grade 12 will get a mental health assessment. So why wouldn't they? Because we check ears, we check eyes, we get you glasses if you need them, we get you hearing aids. Children can have mobility issues addressed and so on. But we act as if they don't have brains and they don't have brain health or they don't have invisible injuries.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
son has a very rare genetic condition that it didn't even get diagnosed until about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And it's only because my
Mhm.
husband and I are just relentless trying to figure out what in
Yeah.
Lord's name is going on. No medical
Yeah.
people did until
Yeah.
4 years ago. He's seen every
Yeah.
specialist you can imagine.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so what it could be such a game changer is, and we want to speak to Illinois and talk to them and say, look, this mental health assessment is so important, but we also want to do a brain health assessment. Because if
Yeah.
we do a brain health assessment and we can show that some kids, especially post COVID, and especially
Yeah.
since the advent of the internet, they
Yeah.
really are struggling in the brain department. And
Yeah.
guess what?
Yeah.
We can get them better. We can
Yeah.
give us 30 hours and we're going to take that kid
Yeah.
way stronger, better, healthier,
Yeah.
happier, more high
Yeah.
performing.
Yeah. And they also need to understand that the assessment is not for the purpose of prescribing meds, right? Treating the symptoms without looking at the cause, right? Because if think about this, if you're blamed, shamed, and punished your whole life for responding to situations in a way other than expected, right? And you're blamed and shamed for just the way you're wired to respond to things. Of course, you're going to be anxious. What am I going to get in trouble for next? Of course, you're going to be depressed because you're always frickin' in trouble, right? You're always disappointing people who you really want more than anything else to please and get their approval. And so, of course, and that's why people with FASD have a 90% rate of being in the mental health system and having depression, having anxiety, having, OCD, all kinds of mental health issues. But the mental health system, and I can say this because I've been part of it, looks at just fixing things. It's that medical model. Get rid of the symptom. But of course, if you do that with meds, you just get other symptoms.
Well, and when it comes to the brain, if you do things like you treat, and this is not to say that medicine isn't the most important intervention at times. I'm not saying it isn't. And
It has
only
a
the
role.
experts can say, psychiatrists
Yeah.
and so on. At the same time as one of the things that of course, we all often talk about and know about is when you replace what the brain is not producing. So let's say dopamine or serotonin, then the brain goes, oh, somebody else is doing that. I don't have to worry about that. And so it's not as though
Yeah.
the brain doesn't try harder. It can be
Yeah.
problematic as well. It's
Yeah.
complex, right? The brain is
Yeah. Yeah.
very complex to treat. But this is why
Yeah.
it's exciting that we are being empowered by
Yeah.
BrainHQ to take into
Yeah.
our own hands, our own agency, help our kids ourselves
Yeah.
by making brain training just a part of our lives
Yeah.
and doing it.
Yeah. That's so very important. I mean, because if you look at these kids, if they're during gestation, during the pregnancy, if mom was under chronic stress, from whatever, maybe she was in dire circumstances, and I've worked with a lot of working in foster care and adoption. I've worked with kids who were product of incest, product of prostitution, product of, just all kinds of terrible situations, but even other stressors like financial stress, the economic stress, the food instability, housing instability, just that chronic maternal stress breaks our thermostat to be able to regulate how we respond to stress. So, we're talking about that also in this
In the bully,
subject, right?
absolutely. And in the Bullied Brain, Dr. Michael Merzenich, the neuroscientist that is the originator of the Brain HQ, he read through the Bullied Brain and wrote the foreword for it. But he really, and he did for the Gaslit Brain too, because he's as passionate as I am to change the outcome for kids. And when Michael gets really really intense about something, he writes in capital letters. So he sent me, I know, he's just an amazing man. He sent me ton of emails about the bullied brain and, well, you should have added this and you've missed that. Like,
I
thank
see a
goodness.
second edition coming out.
No.
No?
No, I included every single
Okay.
thing he said. I put quotation
Okay.
marks around it
Gotcha.
and I put it right into the
Yeah.
book. And one
Yeah.
of the things that he said was, and this is where he went capital letters, he said, when we're talking about brain health, we have to talk about the maternal phase of brain
Mhm.
development. He said mothers need the best care. They
Yeah.
need to have the
Yeah.
stresses taken away from them because that is it's one of the key components
Yeah.
to a healthy brain for children. That should just be everywhere. Everybody should be like
Yeah.
teenagers, start at 13, 12 years
Yeah.
old, start training them, train their parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Schools should make this a priority. It's arguably one of the most important things to learn, much more important
Yeah.
than math and science and language and
Yeah.
art. They should be learning about brain health and children
Mhm.
and how to
Mhm.
navigate their own brain health and what they can do to make it healthier
Yeah.
and stronger.
Yeah.
Love to talk about gaslighting, Patty. So let me
Okay.
just say my big piece I want to say about it.
Okay.
So I think that gaslighting will be very relevant to your audience when I explain why it became so important to me. I was working in a school. I was a teacher. I heard directly from parents that there were 4 teachers who were psychologically and in some cases physically abusing students. And I went to the administration at the school and I reported, which I have legal duty to do.
Mhm.
And also I would have reported it anyways. So I went and reported and I described what I was hearing. And my boss, the headmaster at the school, looked at me, who I knew very well. He looked me right in the face and he said, "That's just old school coaching. Now that's gaslighting." So let me
Mhm.
unpack it for you. I am reporting to him. I'm an adult. I am an experienced teacher. I have a PhD in comparative literature. I actually study abuse. I know all about it. And I study pedagogy and I study all those kinds of things. And I have my boss. So he's in a position of power over me. My
Mhm.
livelihood hangs in the balance. And he looks
Mhm.
at me and he says a very simple phrase. It's gaslighting. He says, "That's just old school coaching." So when he says that, notice what's happening and what is the subtext of what he's saying. Because what he's telling me is that my reality is unacceptable and it's
And you shouldn't
incorrect.
trust it.
I shouldn't trust
Yeah.
what I'm reporting, and I shouldn't
Yeah.
trust myself. I shouldn't
Right.
trust my memory,
Right.
my perception, my education, my ethical responsibility, none of it. Do not trust yourself.
Mhm.
What he's saying is, I
Mhm.
have the power, I have the authority, and I have the money that pays your bills. So if
Yeah.
you want to do what's best for you,
Yeah.
you will become dependent on me and my version of
Yeah.
reality. And I'm saying no abuse has happened. It's just really
Yeah.
tough coaching.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for him, I'm a researcher. So I went, sure, and went out the door and went straight to the research. And I looked at
Mhm.
psychology and medicine and psychiatry. And then
Mhm.
I hit the brain science. And I was like, brain scientists do not agree with you. Brain
Yeah.
scientists say that that type of
Yeah.
normalized behavior that you're trying to sweep under the carpet, it does physical
Yeah.
damage to brains. And I will not keep quiet about it.
I wish more people were so willing to advocate. It takes guts to not allow yourself to be gaslit. I mean, it is a participatory thing, right? Because so many of us we really feel like we're backed into a corner to be a good little girl, sit down, be quiet, go along, because some of those, it can be a big risk.
Well, what happened, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because what happened was I was asked by this headmaster, my boss, he asked me to take testimonies from students. He said, it's not enough for me to hear from parents. I need to hear directly from students if I'm going to do anything.
Okay.
I said, okay. And it's actually a normal process in a school. Victims will choose to speak oftentimes to a teacher that they trust. So I sat across from 8 different students for about 2 hours each, independently, just and asked them to tell me what had happened. So in their own words, this is how you do it for court, etc. So they would
Hmm.
say, these are all the things that happened, and you don't say anything. You're not supposed to
Yeah.
interact with them, only to say that you feel badly that it happened. I'm sorry that happened to
Yeah.
you. And you
Yeah.
have to just ask questions like, say that, he yelled at you. Could you tell me the words that were being used? Or could you please
Mhm.
tell me how that made you feel? So you get this
Mhm.
document, you then send it back to the victim. So I took notes, I typed it up, I
Yeah.
sent it back to the victims, all 8 victims. I said, look, this is just for you. It's your narrative. You control it. It's therapeutic for you, hopefully. But if you want to make change, I will send it on to the headmaster. And they all
Mhm.
said, I want to make change. I don't want this to happen to other kids. And so I
Oh,
sent them all on
yeah.
to the headmaster. But what made me find my courage and what made me become a whistleblower, what made me resign in protest and take a hit, very serious hit to my finances and my career and
Mhm.
everything, my psychology, you name it,
Mhm.
was when I was interviewing these kids, the boys were talking about particular target for the teachers. And the teachers would, this was during basketball. They were certified teachers, but they were coaching basketball. And what they would do is they would stop the play and they would make this one kid come up. And one of the teachers would start yelling in his face, rhetorical questions. You're the best player out there and you're not even trying. Do you even like basketball? Why are you even playing? Like just an
Mhm.
onslaught. And the
Mhm.
kid would would take it for a while, but then couldn't handle it and would start to try and get away, like back away from the teacher. All the kids would be forced to stand and watch. And then the teacher would
Mhm.
grab him by the jersey or the arm and hold him in for more yelling in the face. The other teacher would watch. The boys described it as vicious. And
Mhm.
they said, we wanted to stop it, but we couldn't because it was the teacher. And
Mhm.
so finally I clued in and said, and what is the name? What's the name of the boy? And the answer was Monty. Monty's my son. So, yes, I agree with you, Patty. It takes a lot of guts and a lot of stupidity in certain ways to be a whistleblower, but I had to.
Yeah. That breaks my heart because your son never told you.
I said to my son, why didn't you tell us? And he said,
Mm.
I did. And then he looked me in the eye and he said, quoted himself, he said, I'm the subject of relentless criticism. And our son was slated to play, college ball. He was a fabulous athlete, a fabulous basketball player. These
Mhm.
coaches that were abusing him even said, he's going to be sought after on college teams. He's one of the best players that's gone through this school program, and it's a 100-year-old school, and it's produced
Mhm.
a professional basketball player. So, we believed them when they said that. So I said to Montgomery, I was like, you know what? They are criticizing you because they see your potential. They know that you are serious and you
Mhm.
want to play next level and they are just trying to help you. So, I mean, think of all the gaslighting that's gone on
Mhm.
in this scenario. And then the other
Mhm.
two things, he looked me in the eye and he said, he quoted himself, he said, those guys are freaks. And then the other thing he said was, I hate those guys. And
Mhm.
what's important for all parents to understand in this moment, because Patty, you nailed it. He didn't
Mhm.
tell me. He didn't tell me in correct language because I'd never taught him how to report abuse. I never taught him. This is the language
Yeah.
you use when you are being physically and verbally
Yeah.
assaulted day in, day out by two adults in
Yeah.
positions of power and trust over you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so he didn't have the words. He just had kid language to
Yeah.
tell us what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I'm stepping into your shoes as you were meeting with the kids and saying, I'm so sorry that happened to your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
That, and this happens to a lot of people in the FASD community because we're constantly told that, we're not motivated or we're lazy or we're self-absorbed or we're this, we're that, we're the other when we're just not recognized for needing to learn in different ways or organize things in different ways. Yeah, it's hard. It's just really, really hard.
Well, and kids that have that condition, or kids like my second son, who was a genetic condition, it's invisible. What was
Mhm.
happening to Montgomery was invisible. We couldn't see what they were doing to his brain. He had no
Yeah.
marks on his body. How were we
Yeah.
to know he was being abused every single day
Yeah.
by people we trusted?
Yeah.
And what's fascinating too is this is something you and I have talked about before is the system. What amazed me, and this is why I really study and focus on abuse culture now, because I watched the system protect the perpetrators, not the
Mhm.
victims. There were
Mhm.
upwards 14, 15 kids who found the courage in a
Yeah.
system where they didn't even suspend the teachers. So they were in great
Yeah.
jeopardy and they reported the abuse that was being done to them. And the entire system circled the wagons and protected
Yeah.
these abusive teachers. They never missed a day.
Yeah.
And they basically positioned the students who spoke up as liars. And so,
Mhm.
imagine, like, this from your own
Yeah.
world of FASD.
Yeah.
FASD. It's just so, like, the moral injury, the
Mhm.
manipulation, the gaslighting that goes on
Mhm.
is really so scrambling for the brain. The
Yeah.
brain is not
Yeah.
wired to understand that people lie. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to the brain. So it can be a
Yeah.
huge challenge.
And I'm wondering too, if early in our conversation, you brought up the fact that the people who are bullying are also damaged neurologically. So I'm wondering, if gaslighting is, I mean, technically, it has to have the intent to manipulate and to harm, to cause psychological denial of self perception, that kind of thing. Using this example of the school administrators, circling the wagons, could it be that they are just in that place of denial?
No,
And so,
I wish that
okay.
I wish that was
But
true.
I
I
mean,
really do.
yeah, but I'm wondering, just generalizing out, how do we know if systems are just trying to be self-protective versus systems have crossed over into counterattack?
Okay, so it's such a good question. So basically,
I like to ask those.
yeah, being self-protective and going into counterattack are the same things. So the headmaster had been informed, it turns out, at least 1 year before by a lawyer. A lawyer who was a parent at the school had written an 11-page letter detailing the abuse. And he had
Wow.
heard from multiple parents, different families over the course of the year. I didn't know this, but he had been hearing about the abuse. And one of the teachers was in discussions about going on probation. So they were well informed, but they had not informed
Yes.
the parents or the kids, and they had not protected them. So he was in a position of extreme negligence. So what does he
Mhm.
do? He decides he's going to destroy the child victims and he's going to destroy the whistleblower. He's going to make
Mhm.
everyone believe that I'm unhinged and I'm hysterical and I'm hurting my colleagues and I'm a bad person and I'm a helicopter mother. Whatever it is that he
Mhm.
wants to do, he's going to send that out through all his
Mhm.
channels so that I'm the villain of the story. And
Mhm.
I got fired when in actual fact I resigned in protest. They manipulated
Mhm.
every single thing, and it was all self-protection. Now,
Yeah.
what's really interesting, so in the Gaslit Brain, the first 4 chapters are case studies, and they are case studies of the most educated, advanced, high-flying career, untouched by the kinds of, horrible things that the genetic issue my son has or the
Mhm. Mhm.
FASD that your audience has suffered. They don't have any of that. They are
Yeah.
high, like, oh my gosh, counterterrorism for the Met Police in London and a Nike executive that is the VP of basketball North America, like
Mhm.
untouchable people. Well, guess what? They got bullied and gaslit, and their
Mhm.
careers were utterly decimated by
Mhm.
bad actors. So the second
Mhm.
part of the book is about what is going on in the brain of the bad actor. And
Yeah.
just as you would suspect, being who you are, Patty, they are people who almost most frequently come from significant abuse and neglect. And their
Mhm.
brains are harmed and they have these really
Mhm.
hurt brains. But the way our system operates is we try to protect them rather than get them the
Yeah.
help they need. And we think we're
Yeah.
helping them by not holding them accountable and covering up what they do.
Yeah.
You look at Dr. Larry Nassar, talk about medical gaslighting. Dr. Larry Nassar abused for 30 years before he was stopped, and all the systems protected him. And, he was in a high abuse culture, of
Was
course,
he
which
was he
covers it up.
the gym coach?
He was the
Or
gymnast. He was the doctor for the
Mhm.
gymnast. Look at
Mhm.
Harvey Weinstein, 30-year
Yeah.
career of abusing people, totally
Yeah.
protected by the system. So,
Yeah.
our systems are very dysfunctional when it comes to
When you look at
understanding.
Epstein.
Epstein is a classic example as well.
Yeah.
Epstein,
Yeah.
or in Canada, we have Nygaard, who had the same thing. He's a designer, exceedingly wealthy, who had a private island where he abused girls. And, it's just, It's really,
Yeah.
really amazing how dysfunctional our systems are when it comes to
Yeah.
this type of behavior and not understanding the brain. Just as you said before, I actually wrote it down. It was so sharp the way you said it. This idea that we tend to look at systems, we don't look at cause. And so we almost never look at the brain when it comes to all kinds of
Yeah.
issues in our society that
Yeah.
could be fixed by
Yeah.
repairing the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. So many good things coming out of this conversation. This is one I think that people are going to hit play again and again. I hope anyway. Are there any common phrases that are used by people who are bullying or gaslighting, whether their subject or the victim has ADHD or FASD? I mean, and I reached out to you to begin with when I saw the advertisement for medical gaslighting and the ADHD brain, because there's such a high comorbidity between ADHD and FASD.
Yeah.
So are there common phrases that tend to hook us into this dynamic?
Well, the thing with gaslighting is, and I write about this a lot in the book. So in the gaslit brain, one of the things I learned in studying this phenomenon is that from an early age, so starting at about the age of 4 or 5, our brains get wired by the school system, and it could have happened at home, but it really gets entrenched and reinforced in the school system. We train children to believe that the adult in the room, the teacher or the administrator or the coach, has power. And this
Mm-hmm.
individual is to be respected. Their position and their adulthood and
Mm-hmm.
so on makes them someone that you obey without question. So when you hammer that into the human brain, you have set them up for gaslighting. Because when you sit
Yes.
down with a doctor who's very powerful, extremely powerful, they're an awful lot like a teacher, they're going to
Yeah.
tell you what's wrong with you. And you are going to follow their orders and you're going to respect them and you are not going to question them, because there's almost a rudeness that comes from
Mm-hmm.
daring to say, well, just a second, I'm not sure you understand or you haven't factored in, or that's not really what I'm talking about here. I
Mm-hmm.
think you're missing a point. If we could have open conversations with teachers like that, we would not be sitting in front of doctors just treating them as if they have a godlike understanding of what's going on with our health,
Yeah.
and we don't have any understanding of our brains or our health or
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of, all these systems are kind of so interrelated, right? I'm thinking of the medical assistants who will say, "Doctor will see you now." He has a name. It's not God, right? So don't, "Doctor will see you." That just makes me want to walk out the door.
I know.
Even though it's often her issue, not his, but it does give you a clue about how he is as a person if he tolerates that behavior in his staff.
Yeah. No, it's true.
But the other thing with education is it doesn't matter how smart or what career a parent has. When they're interacting with the school, they are just a parent, right? Their knowledge is gone. Their expertise doesn't matter. They're just a parent. And that's so frustrating because, no matter what our occupation, if we have kids, it doesn't mean that all the rest of our brain is inaccessible when we come to the school to meet with a teacher or meet with an administrator
Well, it's an interesting
or an
parallel.
IEP meeting.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting parallel because when you meet with the teacher, you're meeting with the authority. It's the same thing when
Mhm.
you're a patient or the parent of a patient and you're meeting with the doctor. The doctor has the
Mhm.
authority. And, our brains are very susceptible to believing the position or category and not
Mhm.
thinking about the person behind it. So just because you're a teacher doesn't mean you're non abusive. Just because you're a
Mhm.
doctor doesn't mean you don't gaslight. And so we
Mhm.
have to always, one of the things that I do in my training in the Gaslit Brain book is I tell people
Yeah.
to wear progressive, I use the
Yes.
metaphor of
I
progressive
love that.
lenses. Yeah. So the idea that you're looking face to face at Dr. Jekyll, or you're looking face to face at the teacher, but that doesn't mean that in the background you don't have a Mr. Hyde. So you've got that
Right.
split personality of
Right.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And you'll hear in the
Yeah.
name Hyde, it's spelled
Yeah.
Hyde, but really, I think
It's
literary people,
HIDE.
it's about
Yes.
hiding, right? You
Yeah.
hide this persona. And this
Yeah.
persona like in the case of the kids at the school, including my son, they were being abused behind closed doors. I never saw these individuals ever be abusive in any way, shape, or form. They were a split personality. So when they're interacting with adults or their higher ups or parents, they're these charming, hardworking, lovely, smart, charismatic individuals. The second the doors close, they become someone else. And that person is highly abusive. And so
Yeah.
our brains do not do a good job. We have to
Yeah.
intentionally train them to
Yeah.
reserve a part of ourselves that listens to, like, gut instinct. For example, you oftentimes, when you look back after these kinds of abuse scenarios happen, you're like, how did I not see that? Why did I not act on that? We get a lot of information from our
Yeah.
internal systems, and if we train
Yeah.
them using correct vocabulary, which is how I failed my son, if we train and use nuanced, correct vocabulary for what our system and our senses are telling us, we are going to be a lot safer.
Yeah. 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 And I think this is important for the audience, for those in the audience who are parents, to be thoughtful about this very thing. Make sure you have these conversations with your kids. And if for those in the audience who are living with FASD, we can go back and think about the situations in our past and recognize when we were being gaslit. But, still, again, most of us are parents also, have those conversations.
Yeah. I always say that knowledge is empowering, and you can gain a lot of power and self-belief by learning about how the brain works and
Yeah.
how to keep the brain healthy and
Yeah.
safe.
So you have your presentation that I watched or just the other day was fabulous. And it had 6 things that people can do to help repair or prevent being a victim to gaslighting and bullying. And that's also your 6 chapters in the book, right? So can you lay that out for my audience?
Yeah. So the bullied brain is about how do you repair after you've been traumatized? How do you get your
Okay.
brain back to brain health? And there's 10 chapters and there's 10 different evidence-based ways in which we can all get our brains
Okay.
back up to speed. In the gaslit
Okay.
brain, there's 6 chapters on how do you prevent the trauma from happening. And it's
Okay.
really interesting because they're brain system based.
Yeah.
The first one is exteroception. So exteroception, we've talked about at length. That's BrainHQ. It's doing
Hmm.
that kind of hone your senses. The next
Yeah.
one is called interoception. We've talked about that as well. That is when you develop what's called emotion concepts, vocabulary
Hmm.
for what your internal systems are telling you. In other words, trust your gut. So
Yeah.
keep your brain sharp, trust your gut. Number 3 is the neuroception chapter. And it's about how we have a built-in threat detection
Hmm.
system. And really I'm just giving you such shorthand, but in neuroception, what they've learned is we can get a great deal of calming down of our system. They call it co-regulation. We can calm our
Hmm.
system down by working with each other. So the worst thing
Yeah.
for our neuroception system is isolation. So even if you are
Hmm.
having a hard time, you feel misunderstood, you feel blamed, you feel shamed, you get punished, you know it's unfair. Do not cut yourself off. What you want to do is find the trusted person who you can articulate this to, who gets it and who's going to help you calm your system down. And you have
Yeah.
the power to do
Yeah.
that as well. You can
I
calm your
think,
child's system down.
yeah, I think that's why, groups are so important,
Mhm.
because, and it's funny because neurodivergent people, we are most comfortable when we're with other neurodivergent people.
Of
We
course, of
find each
course.
other because we do get it when other people don't. So,
Exactly. And this is why
yeah.
your podcast is important because it creates community and it shows people
Yes.
they're not alone. And when you
Yeah.
do that, you're letting your neuroception system calm down
Yeah.
and feeling safe is absolutely
Hmm.
critical for health and well-being.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yes, the community, the group, find your tribe. That is
Yeah.
critical. So
And
then
it's also that emotional intelligence that I've spoken about in previous episodes. Being able to read other people. Does that come into this? Does this chapter get into that?
well, it's really interesting you'd say that because one of the great skills of gaslighters is they're very good at cognitive empathy. They can read
Mm.
you like a book. It's one of their
Hmm.
skills. They know
Hmm.
what makes you tick. It's just that they use it
Yeah.
to destroy you. So that's the unfortunate part of cognitive empathy. What they are lacking is affective empathy. Affective
Okay.
empathy is when you walk in someone else's shoes. So if you're able to walk in
Yes.
someone else's shoes and feel their pain, you don't want to hurt them. That's where our
Right.
ethical system comes from. It's that
Right.
that desire not to cause harm to others, to the planet, to creatures. That is the missing
Yeah.
piece oftentimes in people who hurt other people. They're
Yeah.
missing the emotional centers and the affective
Yeah.
empathy. So yeah, I
Well,
mean
and
the book is
that's
packed full of this stuff.
yeah, and isn't that, I mean, how we define a sociopath?
Well, a
Is
sociopath,
that rare person that has no conscience?
yeah, the sociopath, it's an interesting one because I would say that a sociopath is somebody who gets trained by culture. So you think of a Nazi, somebody in the Nazi party, someone who's doing the work for the Nazis. That person
Mhm.
has, by society, been trained to act in completely socially destructive ways. So it's not that they are without conscience, they have committed to and habituated, normalized highly abusive behaviors. Now we're
So it's
watching a
gaslighting on steroids.
yeah, that could be a way to describe it. Yeah, it
Yeah.
could be. But a psychopath is someone who usually during their formative years, and there's complexities to this, and there's genetics, and there's different things. But in general, as we talked about, a psychopath, a Machiavellian, a narcissist, they are people who have been abused and neglected in their formative years. They've been so harmed, it's hurt their brains so badly that they no longer have emotional centers that we would call healthy, and they no longer have
Right.
affective empathy. It gets eroded.
Right.
And that's why they
Yeah.
do harm
Yeah.
to others because they don't feel
Yeah.
anything.
Right. Right. Okay. I didn't mean to take that off topic. What's number 4?
Oh, okay. um, number 4, we've talked about. Again, it's this idea of using progressive lenses. It's this
Yes.
idea of being
Yeah.
able to understand and recognize pathological liars and how they're
Mhm.
lying and why they're lying, etc. So and then the fifth one is I call it proprioception, which is really balance, but it's this idea of being careful not to use shortcuts mentally.
Mhm.
So do your what the experts call slow thinking. Don't rush into anything. Don't let
Mhm.
anyone rush you. When someone tells you it's urgent and they're rushing you and you have to do this quickly, they're trying to make you think fast. And when you think
Mhm.
fast, you make a lot of mistakes.
Mm.
Thinking fast is where bias comes from. It's where things like the
Yeah.
halo effect comes from. You think someone's really good looking, so they can't be lying to you. Our brain makes
Yeah.
terrible mistakes when they're rushing.
Yeah.
And in the progressive lens chapter, the one from before, number 4, I look a lot at habituation. When our brains are exposed to repetition, they think that it's the truth only because they've heard it so often. They stop
Mhm.
being critical thinkers. And so you have to
Mhm.
really watch out for habituation. And this goes back to sociopaths.
Mhm.
If you
Mhm.
repeat to someone over and over and over again that someone is an enemy, like Jewish people are an enemy,
Mhm.
LGBTQ is enemy, women are an enemy,
Mhm.
people from other races are the enemy. You're creating the
Yeah.
conditions for racism and
Yeah.
homophobia, Islamophobia,
Yeah.
anti-Semitism,
Yeah.
misogyny. Like these are the
Yeah.
systems that are so normalized in our world. It's almost
Yeah.
laughable. And they
Yeah.
are built on brain dysfunction. So one of
Yeah.
the things we have to do is really when you hear someone repeating, like a politician, for example, or a boss, or a colleague or a friend or
Yeah.
someone who keeps repeating the same phrase, you should go on high alert because that is
Mhm.
oftentimes a way that a lie
Yeah.
starts to become accepted by the brain as a
Yeah.
truth.
Yeah.
And then the final one is my favorite one. If you get to chapter 6, I promise you it is the most mind expanding, beautiful thing in the world. So, chapter 6 is about how we have brain lateralization. That means our left brain and our right brain are different. And they are.
Mhm.
They
Mhm.
they are connected by a bundle of fibers that allows them to communicate, but they see the world in a different way. The
Yeah.
left, I call the opportunist. It's the part of our brain that helps us survive. It is all
Mhm.
about grasping and getting and feeding. It's the part of the brain that was really good at hunting back in the day because it's how we survived. It found
Yeah.
shelter, it found firewood, it found the right cave. That's the opportunist part of the brain. But if we only reside in that part of the brain, then we become somebody who stops caring about the planet, stops caring about
Mm.
community, stops caring about interpersonal relationships, stops loving,
Mhm.
stops
Mhm.
imagining that there might well be a divine out there. It doesn't understand community and connection and bonding and all the things that make humans
Yeah.
truly amazing. That
Yeah.
right hemisphere, I call it that altruist, that can get shut off. So you look at the brains of
Yeah.
billionaires, they don't have that altruist impulse anymore. They can't grasp enough money. They don't want to be a billionaire. They want to be a trillionaire. And
Yeah.
they've lost
Yeah.
any connection to the altruist right part of the
Yeah.
brain, which is pretty
Yeah.
tragic. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I know we all carry our horrendous cognitive burdens in many cases, but the one person who seems to be so powerful and harmful and so on that we all tend to envy, that person has a pretty hurt brain.
Okay, so that's the left. The right, the altruist, what happens when someone is mostly over there?
Well, I don't know if any of you followed this, but a book was written about it because a neuroscientist suffered a catastrophic brain, I don't know what it was, a brain injury of some kind, and it pushed her fully into the right side of the brain. So she had no access to left. So she couldn't even make a phone call. She couldn't call 911. She couldn't see what was up and what was down. Like, it was very
Yeah.
traumatizing, needless to say. But
Yeah.
she had a stroke. So she calls her TED Talk. You can see her TED Talk and you can read her book. It's called Stroke of Genius because she
Mm.
resided in the right side of the brain for a period of time. And she said it was the most glorious experience of her life. And so being in the right side of the brain is like having a religious experience. You become one with the universe. Or I guess it could also be like taking ayahuasca or one of those like LSD or some mind expanding drug. I mean, people love it because it puts you probably into right brain. But you need
I'm
both,
good.
obviously, like, you
Yeah.
need the balance.
Yeah. I'm going to put the link to that TED Talk in the show notes too. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on, you mentioned it a few times about that old school coaching, right? So we have in FASD because there are a lot of times where there's family interruption, family dissolution. The prevalence for kids in foster care and adoption that are affected by FASD is sky high, right? Just unbelievable large percentage of that population are affected by prenatal alcohol. But they're raised by grandparents. I've even worked in families where kids were being raised by great grandparents. And it's very hard to get people of those generations to listen to modern parenting advice. They're very old school, and old school parenting can look a lot like old school coaching. I think of my father-in-law who, if my husband came home and was targeted, he would take him to that kid's house and the two kids would have to fight it out in the yard, toughening kids up or getting them ready for the real world. Oftentimes it's the moms who are really diving deep into how can I help my kid, whether it's FASD or autism or whatever. Oftentimes it's us as the women to try and repair and heal and, protect and all that jazz. And the dads are oftentimes, yeah, but what about the real world? My answer to that is this is the real world. This is the real world. School is the real world. But how can that play into the gaslighting?
Well, you just described gaslighting perfectly. So if someone is saying to you, you don't live in the real world, you're
Yeah.
dealing with a gaslighter because what they're
Hmm.
trying to say to you is their reality has predominance and power
Hmm.
over your reality. So
Hmm.
it's that feeling you have as a patient when you go into a doctor and you say, "Here's my reality," and your doctor says, "I'm going to put you into this box and I'm going to give you this and you're going to do that and this is really what's happening." You're like, "But no, but." And they
Hmm.
can't hear your reality. And you know
Yeah.
that there's a gap or a discrepancy between what you're actually day in, day out experiencing and what you're being told. So
Yeah.
my second son, who has the very rare genetic condition, he has multiple health issues that seem to be unrelated that we now know are
Mhm.
completely correlated with his genetic
Yeah.
abnormality, which he has a repeat
Yeah.
16 chromosome. So growing up, we were perpetually dealing with all these random things. Like he has kidney disease, he has celiac disease, he has
Oof.
ENTs, had multiple surgeries, he's had to have his tendons lengthened, corrective surgery in his legs. Like this is his whole
Yeah.
life he's been like this. It's a miracle
Yeah.
he's alive.
Yeah.
What we didn't realize until he was around 15, 16 is he turned to me and he said, we were going to the car to go to a physio appointment and imagine what he's been through all his life. And he turns to me and he says, I've decided I'm not going to jump because it would be so painful. I've learned that you can take morphine, and the morphine will just put you to sleep and there's no pain. And I'm putting my coat on going, and so I didn't say anything because he doesn't like to talk necessarily unless we're driving. So I wait, we get into the car, no
Yeah.
self-respecting teenager wants to see your face. They want to talk to you while you're
Right?
driving. So we're in the car and
It's that buffer layer of safety buffer, right?
and
Because
you're
that
not,
eye contact is threatening,
yeah,
right?
it's not that overwhelming. You're looking in your mom's face.
Yes.
So we're driving the
Yes.
car and I said to him, are you in pain? Can you imagine? He's 15, 16, and I'm asking this. Are you in pain? And he says, yeah. And I said, because we've used it ever since he was little, I was like, well, what's your pain level? And he goes, well, 9, 10, sometimes higher. And I went, how often? And he says, always. And that's when we understood that our child has debilitating pain. But we had
Yeah.
no idea he had debilitating pain
Yeah.
because he lived in a body that was pain riddled
Yeah.
without knowing
Yeah.
that other people's bodies didn't have
Aren't
this
like
kind of
that.
agony. And so now
Yes.
that we have the genetics, it has to do with muscles haven't developed properly. He has muscle contractures that, when you get a migraine, it's because
Ouch.
your neck is all twisted up. Well, he has
Yeah.
that all through his body.
Yeah.
In Canada, we have just a miraculous medical system. So we are
Yeah.
chipping away at, working with top specialists on how to minimize this kind of,
Mm.
debilitating pain. But here he is in
Mhm.
high school. Nobody knows what's going on. And he's got the PE teacher, all the school knows he has one kidney and it's at 70%. So he's got advanced kidney disease, but they
Yeah.
don't know he's in pain. So he's in a PE
Yeah.
class and he's just like, no, I can't do anything. I'm just going to sit here on my computer. He's trying not to appear like different from the other kids.
Mhm.
And the teacher says to him, you're pathetic in front of all the other kids. And this
Mhm.
same teacher, he came and went and kind of hid in my office because I was a teacher at that school. And he sat in my office chair and, with his laptop, he's hunched over. And she comes in and finds him. And she puts her two hands down on either side of the armrest. So she's right up in his face. And she says to him, you're not even trying. And this kid has debilitating
Mhm.
pain, like most of us would not even be able to function. His pain levels are so
Mhm.
high. And
Mhm.
he never cries, never complains. But when
Yeah.
he told me about that teacher, tears ran down his face. And, I look at this system, one of the greatest lies out there that I hope nobody believes listening in this audience. The greatest lie is abuse is a necessary evil for greatness. And we don't like to say it,
Yes.
but we believe
Yeah.
it. We think that the
Yeah.
more you abuse, the more someone will attain and fulfill their potential. You're going to toughen them up. And so one of the things my other son was called in this basketball horror show that he was in, where they were using basketball as a cover for abuse. I can't even
Mhm.
use the language on this podcast, but trust me when I say, get the full version of this. One of the things was, you're effing soft, they would say to the boys. Well, it's heavily sexual, you're effing soft. And they were calling them other derogatory terms,
Mhm.
homophobic derogatory terms, female bodies, blah, blah. You can well imagine. Also, along with
Yeah.
your effing retards, your effing embarrassments. So,
Mhm.
retards, it's like,
Yeah.
wow. So these
Yeah.
guys, I mean, talk about psychopaths. And
Yeah.
and just to reiterate for everyone on this podcast, the school system and the government regulators covered everything up and protected the teachers. And so these
Wow.
teachers have free reign to do this every single year with every group of kids that they have their hands on. They are protected. They are allowed to
Even
dish out
still.
this kind of abuse.
Even still?
Oh, yeah. They've never missed a day of work. Yeah. They've got carte blanche.
That's a whole Epstein level story in itself.
Well, it was national news in Canada, and it was on an
Okay.
investigative television show at the same time as that made no change. I mean, if
Yeah.
you have a government regulator that's corrupt,
Yeah.
you don't have a chance. You can't do
Yeah.
anything. If the teacher
Yeah.
regulation branch in this province in Canada is making sure that these teachers are protected, you don't have a chance. Kids can't be protected. It's like, all right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's when it's time to move if you can. I'm glad you were able to move on and be very productive in a strange twist of fate, I think the rest of us are benefiting from your tragic situation and your son's tragic situations. So how do I say I'm grateful for that? I mean, that just sounds perverse, but blessings can come from a lot of fertilizer.
I completely agree. And I I completely agree with you. I mean, it's the same thing as the work that you do. And I think that's why
Yeah,
you can see that there's value in, even if it's painful, even if it makes you
yeah,
vulnerable, even though it's
yeah,
really hard to unpack and look at. That's where
yeah,
a lot of our healing and our growth and our
yeah,
change comes from.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
nothing I would have rather seen than those teachers. What all the parents wanted, this is like 30 parents by this point, what
Hmm.
they wanted was for the teachers to be off
Help.
campus and allowed to repair and recover for 2 years on full salary
Yeah,
and then come back to the community. That is really the model that I believe in. And I think,
yeah,
I hope and dream that that's what we do in the future is when
yeah,
people have really hurt brains, we
yeah,
repair them. We know the
yeah,
brain is wired to repair and recover. So I don't know why we
yeah,
don't do that.
yeah, yeah. That that comes right back to the program you're involved with in Pennsylvania. I will be following that. Please keep me posted
I
on how that's
will.
going.
I
Oh
will.
my goodness. There's so many things on my little, well, I can't say it's a little post-it note. It's taking up my full screen of things that I wanted to address today. But at this point, we've been chatting for a nice long time. So I'm just going to have you come back on again. Will that work?
I would love to come back, Patty. And
Yay!
if your audience says we need to hear more about this or could she speak to that, I'm more than happy to share what I know. And I also, for
Yes.
people that want to know more, I write a regular series for Psychology Today. And so
Yeah.
that series, you can just be like, oh, I'll find a topic. There's a lot of stuff on gaslighting, a lot of stuff on bullying and abuse cultures,
Yeah.
how they work, and what we can
Yeah.
do about it. It's all brain science based, of course. So
Yeah.
if that's helpful to people, it's just right there.
Yeah. Now, to log into we would Google Psychology Today, pull it up on our browser. Do we have to become paying members
No,
to
no,
get all of
no.
your articles?
No, no,
Okay.
it doesn't cost a thing.
Because,
Yeah, you just go on to it, put in Psychology Today, Jennifer Fraser. The title of the series is The Bullied Brain. So you'll find it within 2 seconds and it's free.
yeah. Yeah. That's good because a lot of platforms, you only get limited access,
I know.
right?
But
Yeah.
psychology, I think the principle to that whole site is they believe that it's arguably one of the most important things.
Yeah.
And we all need to know about psychology.
Yeah.
And the more we can get
Yes.
that research out there in a form
Yeah.
that's, 3 minutes, 5 minutes of your
Yeah.
time, you can read about something and go, okay, let me think about that. And I think it's a
Yeah.
good platform
Yeah.
for that reason.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to thank you so much. And I look forward to sitting down with you again sometime and continuing on.
Well,
So this
it
has
was a
been marvelous.
yeah, it was a wonderful conversation for me too. I deeply appreciate the work you do and the knowledge you
Thank
have and the
you.
care that you bring to this issue. It's the
Thank you.
same as me. And
Yeah.
it's lovely to talk to a
Yeah.
kindred spirit.
Yeah. It's my legacy work, right? I'm friends with 3 other FASD authors. So some of us live with it, others have parented with it, taught it, kids with it, that kind of thing. But all of us, I'm 62, I'm the baby. The others are anywhere from 69 to 70 something that I don't know exactly. But I'm the youngest of the bunch and very close to retirement. So this is all legacy work for the 4 of us. We call ourselves the FASD meliorists because we all think that, we're just working to make things better so people don't have to keep repeating or, reinventing the wheel. But yeah, I could easily see you becoming one of us.
Well, I'm more than happy to contribute in any way I can.
Yes.
I think
There's
brain science is very, very hopeful and very
Yeah.
empowering. And so I
Yeah.
love to get the message out to people just how much we can do ourselves to learn about how our brains work and
Yeah.
help one another.
Yeah. So everybody, if this has triggered thoughts for you like it has for me, please feel free to write living with FASD podcast at gmail.com. Send me your questions for Jennifer and I'll make sure that those are included in our next conversation. And we'll see you next time on Living with FASD. I am so glad that you tuned in to today's candid conversation and I hope you found it very valuable in adding to the breadth and depth of your knowledge about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. I also hope we made you laugh along the way. I'm so honored to bring you these candid conversations week by week, and I'm so grateful that you keep coming back. You are my faithful audience, and I'm so grateful for you. Please reach out to me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. If you have suggestions on topics you want me to cover, that you want maybe to learn more about, or guests that you think would be excellent to invite to be on the show, I'm always happy to get your suggestions. And I'm also happy to hear if any of these episodes have touched your life. Please share your story with me. You never know, I might invite you to come on the show. If you want to pick up a copy of my book, Sip by Sip, Conversations with Adults Living with FASD, you'll find the ordering links in the show notes, along with my Calendly link if you want to schedule a complimentary call to talk about any training or coaching needs that you might have that I might be able to help you with through my company, Kasper's FASD Life Coaching and Training LLC. Now, if today's guest has given me contact information to share and you want to reach out to them, that information will also be in the show notes. So in the meantime, I just want to thank you again for taking time out of your busy week to watch or listen to this podcast on whatever platform you have found me on. And please, please, please subscribe, and share this podcast so that others can find it. That's how they find it, is when you share it. And, the more people that find the podcast, the more people learn about FASD and the less hidden we are. So that's it for today. It's a wrap. Have a great week, everybody. And we'll see you next time on Living with FASD. Take good care.